just to let you guys know, me and Rick, we've been cool with each other for a long time. I bring a different perspective because I'm from the community, then joined law enforcement. So we go back and forth. He'll send me a file, and I, let him know on the aspects of whether the officer's actions was consistent. He was the first one to send me this particular video, and he lives down there. So when the George Floyd, he was on the front line, he was protesting. He's connected and tied in with the local community, tied with the government. So he gets firsthand on what goes on down there before anybody else do. Wow. So he was, I told him to give us a little briefing on what's the latest. Do we have any more additional information on what's going on?
Well, you know what? The last thing I saw last night was they had like 3 warrants, like going into like family members' houses, brother's house, right, in the place where he lived at. And that just like troubled me right there. That like, what if I was a friend of his? They could have got a warrant to come in my shit too. Like that don't sound right. I ain't got nothing to do with my cousin Leroy or whatever. Don't be coming up in my house because he's my cousin. And so they came in another family member's house where where Locke was actually, sleeping at.
Right. Now let me break it down to you because that's my job to kind of interpret the police end of it. If they're not,
good luck with that one. Go ahead.
Yeah, the murder suspects, right, known to frequent a certain location. It's very common that you will get multiple warrants depending on. You can't hear me.
They sound very distant, man.
Can you hear me? Hey, Seth.
Yeah.
Can you hear
That's
me?
better. Yep.
Okay, since they doing something to my IG, go ahead, Seth, explain it because I want to make sure y'all get the message clear. Go ahead and explain. You can hear me now? Okay, good. A lot of times, right, if there's suspects, right, that frequent certain locations, a mother, a brother, a girlfriend, law enforcement will get authorization. They'll get a signed warrant from a judge to go and look for these individuals at that location. That's exactly what it is. For whatever probable cause they got for the house, they was able to prove that these individuals frequent that location.
But there were 3 different partners in the same building, though. I mean, I know they can do that, but that's not right to me. I mean, if my cousin do something, you shouldn't be coming in my house with 10 guns pointing at me. That's not okay. I mean, to me. Right. I know it's something they normally do. There's a lot of things that they normally do that needs to be changed. Okay,
when I'm here to tell you whether the actions was consistent with policy and law, and if we have a problem, right, with the procedures and law, then we need to start looking at our elected officials and start saying, look, we're the people, we don't like this particular law or this particular policy or procedures, and that's how we address those. But according to the process now, with the information that we received so far the I's was dotted and the T's was crossed. So far now, from the information we got.
I think it'd be helpful to talk about how, first of all, how do you obtain a warrant, and then what's the difference between obtaining a regular warrant to say, hey, I'm going to knock on the door, announce myself, and then what's the difference between that and saying, hey, judge, this is a high-risk situation, I need to go in as a no-knock warrant? What's the difference in why you would apply for one versus the other?
Go ahead, sir.
Are you a former LEO?
Me? No. I'm just a dude.
Okay. So typically, the normal warrants we would serve are like knock and notice, right? I serve gang warrants in the city and stuff that I'm in. Typically, they may be around the same time. Usually, may go in at the break of dawn, right? So the difference is when we're serving a knock and notice warrant, we're hitting the door, boom, 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 Riverside Police Department search warrant. We are giving you a reasonable time that we would believe that you could get to the front door and open it. but we also have to keep into consideration exigencies. The suspect who we're looking for, their ability to escape, and the destruction of evidence, right? Say that we're serving a search warrant for dope. We know people are in the house, and we hit the door, and then you hear toilets flushing or people rustling around. We're not going to wait until someone opens the door. We're going to force entry. So the difference is we're giving a notice prior to entry. The no knock is we make entry and then we give notification, just like you saw those officers do in that particular situation. They came into the house already and they start screaming, whatever department, Minneapolis PD's, search warrant, search warrant, search warrant. That's just the main difference. You're typically going to do the no knocks when you're looking for murder suspects.
Okay.
It's something that's very high profile.
Because one of the things I had a bunch of questions about this whole situation. Obviously, well, first let me say that I listened to to Joe's Instagram live on Sunday. I think it was Sunday night, wasn't it?
Right. Yeah, it was Sunday.
And I have to say, it was incredibly informative. I learned a lot. It was nice to actually hear the perspective, and it was also good to, because the police that go in and they enter the apartment, or they enter the premises. It's really easy to say you did wrong. You shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't have done that. But at the same time, if I'm putting myself in the police officer's shoes, I don't know who's in that building. I don't know, and if it is policy and procedure, and I do see somebody with a firearm, and it's part of my training, and it's part of a policy and procedure to go ahead and eliminate that. You basically shoot that person. It's difficult to fault that individual officer, even though the wrong person was in there. The person that was there was legally a gun owner, had not committed any crimes, was staying at a family's residence, had no idea. Anybody that's tried to wake up a teenage boy or somebody, a young adult man, have those in the house, and it sometimes can be incredibly difficult to wake them up. So, this guy wakes up, he's kind of groggy. So the question I had then is, looking at other situations where there's been no-knock warrants that have been served across the country, there's been officers that have been shot, there's been officers that have been killed, and they go in and either they're serving the warrant at the right location or the wrong location. Would Amir have been justified if he would have shot one of the Minneapolis police officers, not knowing who they were until it might have been too late?
That's a very good question. Sed, you want to go or you want me to go?
You go ahead first since I just spoke.
Okay. Now
I can go.
All right, go
That's
ahead.
why they shouldn't be doing it. It shouldn't be done. If police officers are getting shot and they're hurting people on accident, first of all, if there should be some consequences. If you go in somebody's crib and you end up shooting the wrong person, there should be some consequences for that. And that's what the people want.
Rick, so I want to add this before I give it to Joe. So I want to paint a scenario, because this happened with our police department. We had a double homicide in our city, gang related. We ended up catching two of the suspects. One of the suspects was outstanding, went up to the Fresno area. We developed intelligence where he was at, right? So our department, along with, I think, Fresno County sheriffs, they put together a plan. They go to the residence where he's staying in question. So now keep in mind, he's not at his house because his house is in our city. So we're serving a warrant in another city.
Right.
Now, when we say that we have an issue with no knocks, so the suspect actually looked out. So they didn't even knock yet. They were getting their gear and stuff ready. The suspect looked out and saw the police getting ready. And this is a statement from the girlfriend. He looked outside. He saw that the police were out there. He went in the bedroom and started loading all of his guns. Mm-hmm. So if Joe and I are on that front porch, this is a guy wanted for homicide. If Joe and I are on that front porch and we knock on that door, what happens to us?
Oh,
back to my point. Maybe you shouldn't be doing it. Maybe y'all should be waiting for him to come outside or something. Maybe you shouldn't be,
Well, you raised an interesting point, because then, you know, I was looking at something recent that happened. I think it was last year. FBI agents, two FBI agents got killed. They were serving a warrant to some child trafficking person in Florida
last year.
Yeah, and I couldn't tell if that was a no knock or not, but it didn't matter, because exactly what you said. The person saw them. I think it was 6 o'clock in the morning. So obviously he must have been expecting something. You know, I don't know how many. Well, I don't know. Maybe he's an early riser, likes to get up and exercise, or so. Who knows? Anyway, he saw them coming. He was ready, and he went out guns blazing, you know, and killed 2 FBI agents. So it brings up the point of, if somebody is truly that dangerous, should they be apprehended in their home when that's actually sort of a sanctuary place? And this, I don't know. I'm not saying I know any better.
So I would add,
why try to apprehend them when they're in public?
So why we serve warrants typically at a home or early in the morning, right, is supposed to be advantageous for us, right, on paper. And then supposed to, if I catch you wee hours in the morning, you're sleeping, or maybe you're just getting up, it's probably the safest time for both of us. So when we say, why don't we catch a murder suspect out and about on the streets? Because if we catch a murder suspect, if I stop you at the store, if I see you in Vons or whatever, and now I try to apprehend you, now there are multiple people who are involved in that situation if that suspect decides to now start shooting. So I'm saying it's not a perfect system, but I'm explaining to you why we would go at a certain time and things like that, especially, and I'll give it to Joe, early morning hours, to try to minimize as much of the threat and danger to both parties as possible.
Right, because you're going to have less people in your house than on the streets. So you got to try to weigh it out. Now, just for the audience, me and Sed are here not to defend, but to be transparent about the procedures of the law of police practices. So it's an unbiased, we're adding balance to the conversation, because a lot of people don't know what we know when it comes down to.
And I'm on here, I want to try to understand. And so I'm trying to ask questions that I think a lot of people also have. So it's really trying to not necessarily accuse or anything, but just trying to understand, because, you know, again, I'm just a dude. I don't know I don't have law enforcement experience, but I'm just like the public who sees this and goes, what the, you know, some innocent dude died. That's the headline.
Right.
You know? I don't have any background and understanding of what happened. And then the more that you dig into it, the more I'm going, okay, what was on this warrant, and what was so important that it had to be no knock for this particular instance? Those are the things that I understand. And then what does a judge question it, or does a judge just typically go, okay, great, sign off, you know, stamp it? Because the public's idea is a warrant is written for no knock. A judge goes, yep, great, stamp, done. Didn't even look at it necessarily. That's the perception of what happens. So what's the reality of that happening?
Now, me doing search warrants, I've never had a judge just stamp it. Actually, I have a judge say, go back and get more probable cause at times. So I've never experienced the way it was easy to get search warrants. Not to say it's not, but me personally, I've had judges say, nah, I need a little bit more. I need a little bit more. I've never had it to where it was just easy. So when I first started doing them, I had a judge kick it back and go, I need more probable cause for that. So I can't speak for every judge who signed a search warrant, but the judges I dealt with, you had your I's dotted and your T's crossed on the probable cause, because he signs that. He puts his name on the line. He's saying that the officer came in with the right amount of probable cause. He swore to the information on that search warrant, and now I'm believing it, and I'm signing off on it. So it was always hard. I mean, I really didn't like doing them, because they would send you through the ringer. You think you have enough probable cause sometimes, and they'll tell you to go back and bring more. So I never had that.
It's not very easy getting search or arrest warrant affidavits approved. If they lack probable cause, they get kicked back for non-sufficient evidence.
Okay.
Me personally, I just feel that there's something else could have been done, like opposed to kicking the couch and waking them up. How come it was 6 guys? Why don't y'all just grab the person on the couch or something like that? You know,
I can answer that one because in our training, we're always taught that if you have your gun out, you never put your hand on somebody. So if I was coming through doing a search and say that there's a suspect, I would never grab you with one hand with the gun in the other hand because it's too problematic. That's just part of training. That we're taught not to grab somebody while they're so say for example, if I was going to handcuff you, Rick, what I would do is Joe would cover me. He'd be the cover officer. I would actually holster, and then I would put hands on you. So that's just part of training.
okay. And so that's something they could have done at that point. They could have came in, saw somebody on the couch, and then someone could have, hey, Joe, take your gun off. Then, I mean, somebody jump on the situation or something, opposed to the way they came in there and just kicked the couch and then woke the dude up out of his sleep. And he sleeps with his gun. And then they just don't tell him to put the gun down. Don't tell him anything. Just shoot him. I don't know. Hold up. And in a city like Minneapolis that already burnt down, I mean, there's communities where there's like no buildings. Like you want to handle things the right way from here on out, opposed to having another George Floyd's type situation where the whole city's burning down.
I mean, there's clearly, obviously, Joe and I were not there, but there are clearly issues with this particular police department. There's something going on in Minneapolis. I mean, these are back-to-back incidents. And then I don't think it was the same department, right, with Michelle Potter or whatever, but I know I think it's the same state. So
No, same
department?
Yeah, Minneapolis PD.
So there's clearly something going on there.
And they're being investigated by the feds right now, too.
And Joe and I have talked about this ad nauseum because we're not taking sides. We are looking at it basically from an officer's perspective. But Joe and I have talked to death is how could that situation have the outcome been differently? And then going forward, how do things change? Because, I mean, I don't want to, I never wanted to kill anybody. That wasn't my goal. I didn't leave roll call and go, hey, tonight I'm going to get into a shooting. You know what I mean? That's just, that wasn't my goal as an officer. So those situations, they're horrible. Joe, what did you say was sometimes, you think you're doing the right thing, you can do everything right, and then still have a negative outcome, right?
Right,
and,
exactly. And this is exactly one of those situations because when you look at how, and we look at, and you know me, I'm a real critic on bad policing, and my experiences allow me to understand the process. So when I look at the way these officers entered, you gave certain different scenarios. You jump on them. I don't think I'm going to jump on somebody while they're laying down that you don't see. I'm going there looking for murder suspects. You have no idea who's on that couch. Your job, and maybe we need to look at this. Maybe this is a type of situation that we got to look at, and maybe we need to try to figure out a way when somebody, right, that's totally innocent now poses a threat to the officer. How do we handle that particular situation? Because officers are trained to go in each room and clear each room. Regardless of who we're looking for, that room has to be cleared. It has to be cleared fast. Go to the next room and you clear that room. This particular innocent man who had absolutely nothing to do with it came up underneath the covers with a gun. Now he poses a
no, not like this. Not like this.
But that is happening so fast. I've heard people say, well, his finger wasn't on a trigger. There's no possible way that anybody can tell me if we do a scenario, take you through the training, and we're running you through a scenario just like that, you're going to be able to tell me that gun, his finger was on a trigger. You talking about split seconds. You got to think, I'm looking for a murder suspect. He jumps up, whether it's like this or like this, you see gun. You just see straight gun. You don't know if this is the guy or not. And you thinking that either your life or life of someone else is going to get taken at that time. Now, I've said this over and over again. I sleep with a 40 on my end table, on my nightstand, right? If you come in my house, I will come to that same reason. Waking out of my sleep, I'm going to grab my gun. If it's the police, it's going to be me or them, because I'm still trying to get my bearings together because I'm waking up out of a sleep, right? So I know that the police will have to take me down because I'm going to try to take them down. So we need to really look at how do we address situations like that, because we got an innocent kid who had a gun permit license, and he might have been there with his gun visiting, had the gun because he know that the 3 murder suspects frequently come in there, and he like, yo, I might be defending myself. They want to come here and act stupid. He had no idea that he's going to be coming out the covers and encountering police. I honestly don't believe that's what he did. I honestly don't believe. But looking at the officers, I know, right, that when we talk about shooting, and we like to say it was a good shoot, it was a bad shoot, this was a really, really bad shoot because officers, right, had to use deadly force on an innocent person. But that innocent person posed a threat to the officers that was in policy, training, procedures that they had to use deadly force. They had no idea that this was a guy that had a permit and he was just staying over his family member's house. They had no idea. And it's bad. I would hate, even though that the elements meet the use of deadly force, I would hate to be that officer. You took a young man's life that had nothing to do with it. Even though by policy is justified, I would definitely you don't want nobody's life to be killed. You don't want nobody's life to be taken. But if you got to take it, you want to know the guy's a bad guy. He tried to kill me, so I had to use deadly force, and I eliminated that threat. But to know that, damn, this kid was just waking up. He came up. I didn't know. I had to use it because it could have been the murder suspects trying to kill me. So this is all the way around.
But don't they have
situation?
Question though? But don't they have shouldn't they still been saying as the dude kicked the couch, like the police or something?
You're trained, and especially with the no-knock warrants, to constantly identify who you are coming in the door. Because during training, and I think Kenny has mentioned, officers have been shot, and because the
Killed.
was killed, because the defense was, I didn't know it was the police, right? Judges have let people off who shot cops, but was able to make that argument in court to say, I had no idea it was the police. That's why during training, they tell you, you really have to make sure that when you go into that dwelling, that you make sure you are announcing who you are. Because if somebody gets killed and it's an officer and they make a strong argument that I had no idea, then it's going to come like we've seen cases in the past, because he sent me cases where the judge said, there's no way that this person knew that was a cop, so case dismissed. So
and there's been times where a grand jury hasn't even indicted the guy. And the crazy thing is, I mean, he had a warrant was for drugs. The no-knock warrant was for drugs. Guy came into the house. He's got his pregnant girlfriend there. He killed the deputy. Once he realized who the people were, he's like, oh my God, it's the police. But the deputy's already dead. You can't walk that back.
Right.
But the guy's like, the grand jury goes, well, obviously you broke into the guy's house. So yeah, okay, he was justified in shooting the deputy.
Right.
So these things happen both ways. It's there's got to be some. Now statistically, most warrants, they're served. There aren't injuries. There aren't deaths. The same thing with no-knock warrants. Statistically, the majority of it. But I think the issue comes down to, there's some professions where we just don't really accept a minuscule margin of error like this. I mean, imagine statistically, if pilots had the same problem, we'd have 3 or 4 flights that would hit the ground every week. There's no way we would accept that. So that's really where it starts to come into play is what can we accept? What can't we accept? And then what do we do to prevent this?
We need to stop doing no-knock warrants, especially the majority of those are in the Black community. I'm pretty sure. They need to stop. It's the same judge I mean, he shouldn't be signing them because he just did the George Floyd trial.
Let me ask
I
you
mean,
something, Rick.
he
With that
knows.
said, no, Rick. With that said, did he do anything wrong in the George Floyd file on a George Floyd case? Because George Floyd got convicted. It looked like what I saw. He did a pretty good job with balancing the case. I didn't see a whole lot of one-sidedness and not allowing the prosecutor to do their thing, not allowing the defense attorney to do theirs. Now I've heard that he was this is a part of his job. Do we know that he has a problem doing his job?
Okay,
I didn't see any issue with that. I thought he was pretty fair with letting evidence come in and not holding or tying anyone's hands. He was pretty impartial.
I noticed a few things, and he should have probably gave him, instead of just the minimum, he could have gave him more time.
Okay, you do know, and I talk about this all the time. And maybe we need to look at the sentencing guidelines when it comes down to police officers, because a judge has to go by the guidelines, and he has to take in consideration a person's past criminal record, whether they've been in trouble or not. If you got arrested tomorrow with no criminal record for murder, and there's a sentencing guidelines, and the judge went way beyond that guidelines, your first thing your attorney's gonna do, we're gonna appeal this. This was crazy. Like I can't slam him just because of whatever reason there is. He went by the guidelines. If the guidelines say, Rick, you get 20 to 40 years, he has that right to sentence you within those guidelines.
Yeah, I think people don't understand that there are sentencing guidelines, that a judge doesn't just go, hey, I'm going to give you this amount of years because I feel like it. There are guidelines that they're bound by. That's why if you look at, and I don't know if you guys have them in their states, but obviously California is known for the 3 strikes law, right? So when you look at what 3 strikes, a judge is basically bound by a certain guideline, just like these silly mandatory minimums that obviously have hurt a lot of people, right? So they're stuck in certain things. So one thing I want to say, Rick, because I see you said this a couple of times and in the chat. In this particular case only, would it have made a difference if they would have served the regular knock and notice warrant? I don't think so, because it seemed like he's a very deep sleeper, right? They still would have knocked on the door several times, but you have to understand, they're not going to stay at the door until somebody answers it. The officers, if the 4 of us are going in there, we have to understand, you have to put yourself also in the shoes of, the shoes of an officer. So if we're on a special enforcement team, the 4 of us wouldn't write the warrant. Or say the 3 of us, say Joe gets the warrant signed, brings it back to the 3 of us and says, I need to have, what's your name down there, bro?
Oh, Ken.
Ken?
Yeah.
Cedric, Ken, I need you guys to go serve this search warrant affidavit on 1234 Main Street.
Mm-hmm.
We will come up with an operations plan. We will make sure that we're going to hit the right house by looking at utilities, so on and so forth, making sure that it is the correct residence, right? And Joe says, okay, well, we keep in mind that the house we're going to is somebody that's wanted for homicide. So this isn't like we're going in there looking for property or something low level. So the mindset of the officers going in there too is actually going to be very elevated as well. So if we were just doing a regular knock and notice, we're going to knock on that door and probably only wait a couple of seconds before we make entry anyway, even on a regular warrant. I don't think it makes the difference in that situation, honestly.
That information is really good to know and to understand. So okay, so in that situation, then, if it was a no knock warrant, would you still have used the key, opened the door, or would it have been like a, the battering ram, or
well, because it's easier. Obviously, if we had a key, we get access. You're still making announcements when you come inside, as the officers did. You still have to make several announcements. Police officer search warrant, police officer search warrant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to what you were saying as far as the judges and stuff like that. Well, I do believe that there's some good judges, but what I've witnessed people being guilty by their color before they even open up their mouth. What is zero criminal record? With proof, with 20 videos of of the person assaulting them, and they still side with the opposite person because of their their job, because of a lot of different reasons. Them being a woman, I've seen it happen like 2 times.
2 times?
With the same person, yeah. Okay. 2 different judges. Now, and 20 videos of him getting beat, stuff thrown at him, the person saying on tape, what they're gonna do to him, and they did it, and I've seen no justice at all. Now, I do believe that there's some good judges out there, but there's some judges out there that they don't really give a shit about us.
For me, I've seen some of what you're describing, right? And right. I'll be the first one to tell you that this is not a perfect system. I mean, it definitely needs some reform. It needs some checks and balances. But I also seen it go right more than it goes wrong. You just said I've seen it twice. Compared to how many cases that been on a day-to-day goes wrong, we're looking at a minority percent of cases that go wrong. Just like Kenny said, there's a lot of warrants being done on a weekly basis. Some of them, a lot of them are no-knock warrants, but we only hear about the bad ones that go wrong. So we got to look at the problem and kind of come up with solutions how to, even though it's a minority, because a lot of people say, oh, it's only a small percent. No, we need to fix that small percent. We need to come up with some checks and balances that's going to correct the small percent, because it may be small percent to the people who don't affect, but the ones that do, it seems like 100%.
It's a small percent compared to what?
The overall process,
no,
right?
But you get what I'm saying. It's a small percentage compared to what? And I use airlines as an example. If airlines went wrong as bad as no-knock raids go wrong, the equivalent based on the number of flights that we have 45,000 flights per day, domestic U.S. flights, and the percentages of there's like 20,000 roughly no-knock warrants issued per year, something like that. Right. So if the same percentage was what went wrong with flights as it does with no-knock warrants, I know it's not, there's a lot of hands and there's a lot of things, there's a lot of crazy stuff that can happen on a plane. But if they crashed at that same percentage, I mean, we wouldn't, there's no way anybody would accept that. So we can't, these things happen. Granted, most of them go off, there's not any problems. But I do completely agree with what you just said, Joe. We can't, this is not acceptable. We have to figure out a way to fix it.
I think that it's problematic to compare it to pilots, or there's 255,000 people who die every year for medical malpractice, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've seen them. The variables of flying an airplane are not the same variables of serving a no-knock warrant. I think typically if something goes wrong with an airplane, it's something mechanical, right? It's
usually,
mechanical or weather. There's no variable on the other side that may, and when I say may, I'm not talking about in this particular case, because we're generalizing.
Yeah.
If I look for somebody who killed somebody, there's a variable on the other side that's probably not going to go according to plan. Hence, sometimes when we serve search warrants, that people aren't there. People don't always cooperate. So I think it's a terrible comparison of the two, just because I think the variables are very different.
Well, there's 1,000 variables that go into. I mean, it's if you actually dive into what goes into flying a plane and how miraculous it is that we don't have. I mean, it's amazing. You look at how many hands have to touch that flight and touch that plane.
How many pilots die every year in comparison to how many officers die in the line of duty?
How many pilots die in the line of duty?
In comparison to how many officers are actually shot, not COVID related or anything like that. Then how many officers die?
Based on crashes, it's minuscule. it's minuscule because we don't accept. There's just certain professions where we just don't accept, minuscule errors.
Would you say police officers are killed by somebody else and pilots dying?
Of course.
That's
what
I'm saying. Variables, the situations are not the same. That's all I'm trying.
I think, are you making a comparison on the percentage of what's right, what happens right, then versus what's wrong, or the actual job itself? Because you just made a point in reference to pilots. I could take that same point and flip it back on you and say New York City cab drivers. You know how many cab drivers get killed on a yearly basis? Like that, cops getting killed is not even in the top 5. Cab drivers number 3. So what are we comparing it to, and how are we comparing it? I think we're looking at the overall, do it happens greater or lesser than going right than going wrong?
The point I'm trying to make is what's acceptable. What's an acceptable error rate when warrants get served?
Well, I would agree that the 4 of us would say, because we all have family, if it was one of our family members, it's 0, right?
Right. Of course.
It's 0. However, being human and things like that, that's why I'm big on accountability. How do we get that to 0?
Mm-hmm. Right. And that's my question.
About this the last 2 days.
Right.
Well, I'm in complete agreement with you. That's the issue isn't to try to shift blame. The issue is, okay, there's just a lot of back and forth. We've become very tribal in this country. There's a lot of people who are on one side. They can't seem to see things from the other person's perspective. One of the things that so the issue should be on, how do we fix this? I'm in complete agreement with you there. That's really what we need to get down to. Should the judge have signed off on it? I don't know. Probably, maybe not. Are there ballistic shields? Is there other defense things that can be used in these types of situations? I don't know. I don't know how often ballistic shields are even used. And I'm just going off of what I see on TV. And
when you bring that up, when we talk about the defunding of organizations, so here's the thing I want you guys to think of.
Well, hold on, Rick, hold on. Hold on 1 second. Hey, Rick, you're a defunding the police. You're a defund police supporter or no?
Yes, I am a supporter.
Okay, hold on. Now go ahead, Seth, because I know where Seth's going, and I just wanted you to hear what he's about to say. Go ahead, Seth.
Okay, go on.
I think because we kind of view law enforcement like the military, so the military falls under one blanket of federal law, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because of federalism, each state is able to govern their own municipalities. And Joe, you said it's about 10,000 separate police departments throughout the United States?
18,000 law enforcement agencies.
Mm-hmm. So all of these departments, fellas, are funded differently. I am fortunate that I'm in the state of California, and the particular department that I work for had all kinds of resources. That might not be the same for a police department in Kentucky. So when you talk about the shields, and some departments don't have tasers. Me personally, I had a taser. I had a 40 caliber less lethal munition along with the beanbag. So if I show up and say it's just Joe and I have all of those resources right there, to where maybe another department has to wait for the SWAT team to show up and other people. So resources can also dictate how a department may act to a certain situation. Not everybody has a Bearcat, right? So you guys brought up a perfect point. Were shields allotted to them? Maybe they don't have the funding to have had those shields where they could have sat back and did all of these calls. There's so many things that go into that. So I'm really critical. I know it's the first time I've talked to you two, but Joe will tell you, because I'm a former instructor. I'm a use of force instructor. So that's why I like having these discussions. I'm very, very critical on police officer training. When somebody does something wrong, Joe will send me a video and we'll be like, no, that was wrong. But what I had to start backing off of is putting everything into my perspective, not knowing how other departments are funded, because I look at all these other departments of having the same funding training as I did, and that's not necessarily true.
So when we start talking about defund the police and we want a better product, it might have made a difference if, like, I remember when I first got on the TAC unit and started doing search warrants, I didn't have a shield at first. And then as time go on, we got shields. I had training for a shield, a lot of training for a shield. So after that, I was able to give a little bit more time because I got a ballistic shield, where if it was just without a shield, I wouldn't have gave any more time if I identified a threat. Because training tells you, try to give as much as time as you possibly can, right? Before a life can be taken. So you try to have these options so you can give time. But if you don't have a shield and cover you, and he comes out with a gun, like how much time people saying his finger wasn't on the trigger. That's happening so fast. There's no way that if I put you through a scenario that you would be like, yeah, his finger was on the slide or the side of the gun, we shouldn't have shot. That happens extremely fast. We have the luxury of slowing it down, slow motion, and everybody see his finger and it's coming on the side. It does not happen that way. And Rick, you know I'm real critical of bad policing, and I'll be the first one. We've been talking for a long time, and you know that I will call it like I see it. There's no way this guy had. There's no way he had time to see that.
You know what? I'm looking at it from a different perspective. I'm looking at him kicking whoever kicked the couch to wake the person up. I'm just seeing it. I don't even like them coming into people's houses. Like I don't, there's something about that just don't feel right, because this is what they do a lot of times. Like there was one gentleman, something happened. I believe they shot somebody. Then they went through his parents' house after they killed their kid. Then they came in and kicked down the parents' door and just went through all their shit, and I don't know if the kid lived there or whatever the situation is. That just feels disrespectful to me for someone to kill their kid, and then you got to go search for some dirt to help you with what you've done. And so back to the defund the police thing. Now, where I'm at with that is, if you spend a lot of money in this one, with the police, give some money to some other people that can help, that can help maybe calm things down where the police was aggressive at, where they did something wrong, where they came in and they just did wrong, when someone else could have, with a little bit more training, could have maybe talked the situation down a little bit. The person didn't have a gun pulled out. Maybe he had a knife. That's where I'm at with that.
Well, they started implementing social workers and the social workers actually killed, responding to situations, because the social workers have gone in there and the police were not, and social workers are actually getting shot.
Yeah. And I have one more question to you.
Go ahead.
What do you think about the way the chief and the mayor and how they handle things?
Me personally, I think they handled it poorly. I think the community owed way more than that. That was sad. Instead of coming out saying, "Look, we're going to investigate it, but this is what I have now. This is what I have now. I have a young man who was on the couch. He was asleep. He was underneath some covers. He had a firearm. He
was a suspect. He was a suspect.
No, he was not. He was not a suspect.
No, but that's what they said, though.
Yeah, but that's why I said I don't agree with how they handled that.
Yeah.
That's why I said I definitely don't agree with how they handle that. I mean, the community. I'm from the community. We want to know. Give us right information. Stop being biased to support the officer's actions. Because in this particular incident, I don't think you need to try to support the officer's actions, because policy dictates their actions. Like, you don't have to try to play games with this particular incident. You can literally say, we have a young man that had a licensed gun owner. He was sleeping on a couch. He was not a suspect. He was not a part of who we were looking for. Mm-hmm. The officers followed their training and policy to the T. They're entered. This young man came up from under covers real quick with a firearm. This innocent man, right? This innocent young man now became a threat to the officers. The officers perceived that threat as a deadly threat, and they used deadly force, which is very consistent with policy. I understand the outcry that this young man died. An innocent person, nobody wants to see an innocent man die, right? we're conducting an investigation, and what we can do is guarantee once that investigation is over, even it's looking as they was consistent with policy, maybe we need to start looking at how do we safeguard. Maybe we try to implement additional training to try to figure out how not to prevent this from happening again. But as of right now, what I see on that video, these officers was very consistent with policy and procedure. And then take questions. They went out and they did a horrible job being transparent. They didn't. Most people want to know the truth. They can deal with what I just said rather than take what the chief and the mayor did. That was horrible. It looks like it's a cover up. Right. And I tell you, you don't even have to cover this. Be transparent. Be honest. We did exactly what we was trained to do. Policy and procedures. We did everything right, but something wrong happened during that process. So we need to figure out and look at this and say, is there a way to prevent this in the future? I know we're coming off the George Floyd. I know we're coming off of what's the female, Officer Potter. So there's a lot of tension in the community. There's a whole lot of attention. And this is supposed to be a new mayor you guys put in. And this guy guaranteed transparency. He guaranteed change. He didn't reflect that during that press conference. He should have said, I'm on top of it. I will make sure that if and when the investigation is over, I will come back out and do a press conference and tell you exactly where we're at and what we're doing to prevent that. Because regardless of what happened, we had an innocent young man get killed. And even though it looks to be justified right now, we want to be better. We don't want innocent people getting killed. So that wasn't done. And I hate the fact that they did it exactly the way they did, because it looks like they was covering things up. Go ahead, Sid.
Anything that. and the reason why, that's why I said, go ahead, Joe, because you and I had discussed this earlier, back and forth via text. So
right.
Yeah, right. They totally messed it up.
Yeah, they did.
And our community leaders are phenomenal. They have experience, for years watching young people get killed and hearing, the lies and hearing the cover-ups, and certain people you just can't pull that on. And the young lady, like, that's like my sister. Like, she's not my sister, but she's like my sister. Like, I can go over her house at night. I ain't gotta call her. I can just knock on her door, and she will come to the door and be like, hey, what's up, Rick? Come on in. Like, that's my sister, and I'm so glad that we have her. She should have been the mayor. Maybe, I'm sure she would have made a difference. I'm sure she would have been tougher on a lot of situations. This whole thing is just sad. And, going to the interim chief's house, man, she lives in like a rich neighborhood, man. She's making money off of brown and black bodies,
So I've got a question. And I think this is one of the things that people get frustrated with is who should be held accountable for this.
When we look at being held accountable, when people say held accountable, there got to be some form of wrong, right? This kid got killed, and that was wrong. But when we say held accountable, you can't hold an officer accountable, because if I followed my training and policy, then you can't hold me accountable. I did exactly what you trained me to do. So now we got to look at the policymakers, the elected officials who sit at the table and they sit back and they write the criteria of how officers should respond to these type of incidents. So do we look at that? Because how do you hold a guy who followed his training and followed his policy? Because that like, as a vice president of a union, this is what, when an officer gets written up, first thing I get as the vice president, I get the policy violations. The officer said he was in violation of 206 force. You get all these policy issues. I can honestly say, looking at the tape, how do you hold that crew of officers accountable for something that they was trained to do? So
what about higher up? I'm kind of going down that road of when you start talking about policy, I'm kind of even going higher than that. I mean, we don't have a copy of the warrant yet. Minnesota just enacted a law, I think it was last year or the year before that. Every no-knock warrant has to be sent to the state, or request or something has to be sent to the state within 3 months. I think I don't know if Rick, do you know anything about that?
That
Not
on the surface, I would say that just doesn't sound right, because I would have to wait 3 months to initiate a search warrant on
No, not serve it, not initiate it. Once it's done, once you've executed it, you've got 90 days to submit that, what you used to request that no-knock warrant to the state.
Oh, okay. After, okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Right. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Rick. I just started reading stuff about that the other day.
No, I'm not. But I want to see the officer. I want to see him fired. I want to see him charged. I want to see the chief fired. I want to see change. I'm not. An accident is when you knock over, some a glass of milk.
Should the judge be held accountable?
A person was killed. Something. This, and then the guy that kicks the couch. Like I have a problem with that. Like that's a.
So I hear you, Rick, but you have a problem with the training. You have a problem with the policy. So for me, if I had to defend that officer as a union official, I would definitely bring his training manual and say, your police department, right? They trained this guy to do that. This officer right here, he did nothing wrong but follow his training. So it would definitely go back to the police department, because he did exactly what he was trained to do.
And I would get rid of the judge for knowing one of the biggest cases in, since what was the gentleman in LA? Or maybe one of the biggest cases in the world, and then continue signing off on those type of things that could cause more problems to the community and to,
Right.
Hey,
Rick, do we know that there was a problem? He shouldn't have signed off on the warrant?
They haven't released it. They haven't released it yet. They haven't
Okay,
released the warrant yet.
So the probable cause for this warrant may be he may have met the threshold.
Maybe. Yeah, we don't know.
As of right now,
what we're doing is we're trying to invent the wheel to say that there was something wrong, that they should have never been there, and that's problematic, because as it stands, regardless of the circumstances, they had probable cause to be there. They were looking for somebody who actually murdered somebody. That's the big picture. It is unfortunate that this young man lost his life, because I believe that he was innocent. But for some reason, the big picture is not being looked at. They're looking for murder suspects. Correct?
Yeah.
It's not like they're looking for some guys who stole lollipops from the liquor store.
Right.
It is the highest crime of the land, that and sex molestation of children, right?
Right.
So they have probable cause to be there. It is very unfortunate how it turned out. And people in the chat, you have to listen for understanding and comprehension instead of listening to respond. I'm not talking about the young man who lost his life, because as far as what we know, he had nothing to do with this, correct? But they obviously had enough probable cause that there are 3 people that are just miraculously still. I know that there's one person in custody, but based on that information that I shared with you, there's a 17-year-old that's in custody somewhere who's affiliated or has some connection with a homicide. Why is that being overlooked, like the police just had no business there in the first place?
Go ahead, Rick.
Well, they should have never. First of all, the city and whoever's in charge, there shouldn't be no more no-knock warrants.
Okay, with that said, right, the elected officials, they control that. Officers, if you give me a warrant and we're all a part of the tag team, that's a way above our pay scale. It says, go look for murder suspects. Here's the location. Here's your warrant. You have the training. We all, 4 of us, go and we do the job that we are trained to do. And I'm not diminishing. Amari got killed.
Right.
I'm not like that shouldn't have happened. That should never. I see somebody. Well, tell that to his mother. No, that shouldn't have happened. I would never be wanting to have to tell the mother that.
It's because their mindset, they're like this. They're not listening. We're talking about two separate things, and they don't understand that we're talking about two certain things, separate things.
Right. And you guys are talking about police officers getting hurt. You're talking about all these different things. That's why they shouldn't be on the table.
Well,
so you're saying knocks or search warrants, period.
I'm saying you wait till they come outside and then have 5 officers out there with the powerful tasers and tase them soon as they come outside and put them down.
So what if the
jail
has
like,
a gun search? There are people that are involved.
Look at all the cases of where there was like white people that they didn't get shot. I mean, it's been like case after case after case after case. Now I'm sure there's one there we can find where this person shot, but for the most part, everybody. If you look at the most, the guy that went into church and killed 10 people, but he was taking. Hold on.
Push back, brother. So what we're doing here is, why are we comparing something that happened in another state to something that happened in Minneapolis? Those officers have no connection with each other.
True, but what I'm saying is there's so many people that pull out guns, and there's a guy that just shot what was that? Wisconsin. Just shot 5 people and walked past the police with a gun, and got off. Killed 3 or 4 people and got off.
Situation not even the same.
This guy coming out of his sleep with a gun, and when you have all these other people that nothing happens to them.
I
got
What I'd like to see.
I'm probably. It's difficult to have that discussion with me because I run statistical data all the time. Right. And I will argue with you with the data as far as who gets shot and uses of force, because I don't like to support things. Basically, I'm not a real emotional person when it comes to a lot of stuff. When I speak on certain things, I like it to be supported by data, not my feelings. So, I mean, there's another time, Rick, you seem like a good brother. I mean, I have charts and all kinds of stuff. I'm actually writing a thesis right now on why police officers make the decision to use force against people. Like I said, that's why Joe brought me up, because this is really my area that I really deal with. So I try to, and Joe would tell you, Joe wouldn't even deal with me if he didn't feel that I was a fair person.
He goes a lot on.
I'm not fair. I'm just saying my perspective on the whole. Everybody arrested.
Rick, did you say I'm not fair?
No. I'm not saying that you're not a fair person, man. I'm my beliefs, man. And I just, I want to see change. I'm tired of this. There was a gentleman, which started me actually getting out in the streets and trying to, coming from my, 500-inch TV in Edina, out to the streets, there was a young man, witnesses said he was handcuffed, Jamar Clark, and he was shot in the head. And then they said he had video. No, they said he was acting, he was acting crazy in the back of the ambulance, and he was doing that. And I saw the video. I didn't see that. So we're just tired here,
Hey, Rick, let me ask you something. Right. Should every officer pay for Derek Chauvin?
No, but the president and the people up under him need to make some serious changes, man. And they're not. But they're not making any changes. It might be a little change. We changed the policy with the no-knock warrant, with this and that, but you're still able to come in there and shoot somebody that's in their sleep. It's a bunch of bullshit to me. I'm just saying. So
Rick, I got a question. How many? I don't know if you know this or not, and I don't know the answer to this. How many hours of training do officers receive using their firearm versus how many hours of
okay, I didn't hear the last part, but it sounds like
Sorry,
like to
Go
me.
ahead, say it again. Go ahead, say it again, because you cut out.
So how many hours of training does an officer receive on how to use their firearm? So how many hours do they spend at the range versus how many hours they receive de-escalation training?
Well, that's going to be department specific. Again, it depends on resources. My first department that I worked for, we shot 6 months. We have what's called posts. It's a standardized training the whole state has to bound by. So we have to have training every 18 months. Does not mean that we have to wait 18 months for the training. Sometimes we may end up going twice a year. And special units like Joe worked in, you get all kinds of additional training. The second department, which I ended up retiring from, I shot every other month. As far as training, I was an instructor, so I was always because I was putting on training for police officers. So that's why I said, I feel what Rick's saying, but it's really hard for me to compare the training that's going on in Minneapolis to my police department, because it probably wouldn't be fair because of the resources we have allotted to us here in California. I talked to, we were on a live with Tate, and he worked for a very large police department. But he even told me that his department is twice the size as the one I came from, fellas, but we actually train more than they did. So obviously, I will agree with you, Rick, 100%. I think there has to be a lot to do with training. You guys will always hear me come back. I think that more than any, and this goes back to what you were talking about, Ken, earlier with the airplanes. I think that why we see so much a drop-off or deficiency in policing is because I think if you looked at some of those departments, there's probably a lack of training. There's a lack of standardized training. I think that we officers need to train more in jiu-jitsu, and like you guys said, de-escalation. Absolutely. I think that the deadly force should always be your last resort. It should be grabbing your gun. You should be able to talk yourself out of something, and then sometimes you got to put hands on people. Rick, I'm old. I'm 50, so I'm used to smacking people. Trust me. And I worked in the back, and everybody was laughing at me, man, because one of the last things I ever talked about is pulling a gun, man. So I think it's a lot of training, and I think that's where it's difficult. And sometimes for me as a former instructor, is we fall under this big umbrella. And Joe has more training than I do, especially in certain aspects that's going to apply to probably the majority of policing in America. So that's where I think the deficiency.
And I keep hearing this training thing. Like, I mean, and I'm sure people need help with training, and people need a lot of different things. People need help with mental health, and I'm sure there's a lot, but like some of this is not training. Some of this is basically like I can do whatever I want to do, and damn near I'm gonna get away with it. Up until recently now, it might be a 50-50 chance, that I can get away with it. But because now maybe if I was in Minnesota, they're like 2-0 right now with convicting cops. I mean, so I don't know if the training is it. I think you got to lose something. You got to lose a pension. You got to lose like your college, your kids' college. Like, okay, me being on this guy's neck, I could end up losing, my kids' college. Like, you got to lose something, man, to have you think about.
I am okay. I am okay with if I shoot somebody, if Cedric shoots somebody, Rick, and I'm found to be wrong, that qualified immunity, my pension, all that stuff should not be protected, and it probably should go to the victim of the family. That's you're asking. That is my opinion.
Yeah, Rick, and I agree with Sed, and I agree with you on that. Derek Chauvin should not be collecting a pension, and he will collect a pension. I mean, it's sad. So when we start talking about accountability, that's exactly the type of accountability I would like to see when we start talking about incidents like you say, somebody, we're not talking about accidents. We're not talking about you're trying to do right and then something wrong happens. We're talking about you kneel on a guy's neck for 9 minutes and change. There's no excuse for that. There's no excuse. That guy he's gonna be collecting a pension in prison. That shouldn't be. It should be taken away and given to the Floyd's family.
Hey, quick question. Now, when I put you guys on mute, what happens?
No, we still talk. Your thing will just be on mute.
Okay, and you can't hear me?
We can't hear you, but I think we can communicate. But I think the live action reasons they can't.
I'm gonna put you guys on mute for a second. I'll be right back.
All right. Hey, Kenny.
Yeah.
Here's your chance to ask more questions. I mean, you had a lot of questions. That's why I was like, I'm gonna bring you on live.
Well, it sounds like it sounds like because the qualified immunity thing that's a hot topic. That's something that I've discussed with a lot of other people. About that needing to get reformed. That's a frustration I think that a lot of people have.
And I would say this, and I don't know if this pertains to you because if you've been asked the question a lot, maybe you know more about it. But a lot of people talk about qualified immunity, and they don't even know what it is. I think they're kind of repeating because I'll ask people, they'll go, "Well, said you guys shouldn't have qualified immunity," and I said, "Well, explain to me what qualified immunity covers." And then it's always silent because people are just repeating their talking points.
Right.
So when we talk about qualified immunity, doesn't protect us if we do something wrong.
On a criminal aspect, you get charged for qualified immunity. That don't have nothing to do with protection on criminal charges.
Right. Qualified immunity originally started out as something to protect government officials, and it's not just police officers; it's government officials. When there's harm that happens, and it happens, they're trying to do their job. And somebody gets harmed, but the government official is doing their job and they're doing it in good faith. That's what it was intended for.
So I could be performing. Say that I arrive to the scene and it's a drowning kid or something like that. I decide to perform CPR on this child.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, things end up bad. This child passes away. The family can go, "Oh, we didn't think he did something right. He didn't do the correct impressions or whatever," and then they want to come after me civilly. Immunity, because I'm operating in good faith, would protect something like that.
Right, that and the Good Samaritan laws and all that other stuff. But that's a good example. But for kind of talking about qualified immunity, now what's happened over the years is it's morphed into these situations where you have a brown bag versus I can't remember. It was just King, I think it was. It was just argued before the Supreme Court. It got kicked back down to the lower courts for review. These plainclothes police officer beat the tar out of this college kid. They had the wrong guy. He hadn't done anything wrong. They misidentified him. They beat the crap out of him. Didn't even tell him he was a police officer. Went all the way to the Supreme Court, and all the courts in between the Supreme Court, all the courts in the lower court up to the Supreme Court said, can't sue him. It's qualified immunity. So what's happened is the bar to sue somebody, it's dependent on a whole bunch of different factors. But the bar to sue someone for wrongdoing has been it's phenomenally off the charts, and it has to be reformed. And it's not a law; it's a doctrine that was created by the Supreme Court to give to government officials. And you have government officials who have bankrupted people. You have government officials who have physically harmed people. You have government officials that have done malicious, horrible things, and the courts go qualified immunity. Now, what happens is when the Supreme Court rules on qualified immunity, the lower courts go, I'm not even gonna entertain this because it's just gonna get kicked back, and I don't want to make a ruling and have a court case that's just going to get kicked back by the appellate courts. And the appellate courts, they raise the bar even higher because they don't want it to go to the Supreme Court and have it kicked back and say, oh, you're wrong, this is qualified immunity. And as an appellate judge, I just wasted however much time for this person to sue this officer. So they won't even let it go through. So you have egregious, horrible civil rights violations that take place from government officials. and the courts rule qualified immunity. And then what happens is, or what's happened is, the qualified immunity in some municipalities has bled into the criminal courts. So because of the fact that, oh, you just beat the tar out of this person, you broke bones, you sent punctured lungs, you sent him in the hospital, you put him in a coma, oh, you got qualified immunity. Well, I guess that's the end of that. You know, now that the prosecution should have that person arrested, they should be criminally charged. But that's where there's a breakdown in the system, and that's where people feel like there's a breakdown in the system, is that if the state isn't going to prosecute the state for violating the laws of the state, the citizen has no recourse because of qualified immunity.
What do you think?
I don't know if you heard all that.
You heard it said, because I'm acting in good, I should be protected. But if I'm just right, I shouldn't be protected. But like he said, there has been case over time, case by case. You see, we're like, come on, dude, like y'all went over, and you're protected with qualified immunity. So
there's no argument. Hey, Ken, I agree with you. There's no argument here, bro. That's easy for me.
Yeah.
Next question. So some of this, man, like I said, I'm very objective. Some of this is real easy for me.
Yeah.
Sorry if you thought you were gonna get me to argue with you. My bad. Easy for me, bro.
Hey, Kenny.
Yeah.
Once you give him the question you gave me, and I said, I ain't even gonna answer that, and I'm gonna wait till the live. When you said the officer.
Oh, is that the one where?
So
you know, in this, if we take this situation, so you know, we're talking about, this is just it's just a shitty situation, you know, with this whole Amir Locke situation, because now so the officers, in understanding policy, understanding procedure, however crappy that might be, whatever you agree or disagree with that, as an officer who's going in, there's a murder suspect, I see a firearm, I'm trained to take that, I see that as a threat, I'm trained to take that out. Okay, what if Amir stood up and was like, holy crap, I'm getting robbed, and he shot a couple officers in the head? I mean, that's a crappy situation. It's a horrible situation. I feel, you know, Amir feels like he's being robbed, and it's not, I can say it's a hypothetical in this situation, but there's been other instances where officers, that you look at my favorite example is the Ray Rosas case in Corpus Christi. I don't know if you're familiar with this or know about it, but basically SWAT went in. This guy had a nephew who was dealing drugs. SWAT comes in, they throw a flashbang grenade in the guy's home at 6 o'clock in the morning or 5:30 in the morning. The nephew isn't there. The uncle is disoriented. The officers come in, SWAT comes in, the guy grabs his .357 Magnum, unloads, fires 15 shots. 5 shots hit 3 officers. One of them hits the officer in the leg, inches away from, you know, getting that hitting the wrong artery, which would have ended the guy's life. And they arrest the guy, attempted murder. It goes to court, goes to trial. The jury says, well, of course you didn't know who the hell you guys were. You threw a freaking flashbang grenade in the home. How was he supposed to know you're police? He couldn't even hear anything. Once he unloaded his firearm, he realized the police were there, and he gave himself up. But after shooting 3 officers, unloading 5 bullets inside of 3 officers.
Others were something similar just happened. They served a warrant. They came in, it seemed like they announced themselves, but